Dear BX, in a lot of ways, you shaped the way I see the world and myself. It wasn't always like this though. We come a long way. I wrote this to tell you part of the story of how I fell in love with you. It started in '96, the year of the big blizzard and the year the Yankees won the World Series for the first time in 18 years. I only crossed the bridge to get to you, but you felt like a different world. Everyone I knew from the heights called you ugly and dangerous, and I admit, I believed them at first. I'm sorry, BX. I couldn't see then that you would grow and what you'd mean to me. I didn't know all the things you've been through, how some tried to tear you apart, but you survived. You were always good at surviving, BX. All I saw in those first couple years was the damage and danger, and I was scared. Honestly, it took you a while to show me some love too. Look at us now though, BX. You took a scared immigrant kid from junior high school 22 and turned him into craze. And art was one of the ways. As a kid, I saw the names of all the other people that loved you scratched into your skin, and I loved you ever since. What's up, BX and the rest of the world? Welcome to Bury Me in the Bronx. I'm Luis Craze de Leon, an analyst in the legal field, podcast producer, and all-around Bronx enthusiast. I've lived in the Bronx for most of my life, and I've always been fascinated with the history and the culture here since I was a kid. It always feels like I'm learning something new. This is not a true crime podcast, even though it may seem that way by my intro. Thank you, Rick. Now, let me preface this by saying the Bronx is not a monolith. There are a ton of perspectives, a ton of experiences, and I hope to capture a few of those through this project. Second, this is about my history with the BX and some of the things that I found out about it along the way. So thank you for taking this journey with me. One of the things about the Bronx that I love the most and how I started my love affair with it was the art. Now, while researching this, a few questions did come up for me and some of the folks that I spoke to about the topic. First, what is Bronx art? Well, my answer, and honestly the most common answer that I got when I asked folks in the BX, is graffiti. I mean, the bigger question, and I got this from a couple of people, is does that include architecture, writing, performance art, or just paint and sculpture? My answer to this is all of the above. But for this episode specifically, and because it's where my journey of answering that question began, I decided to focus on graffiti and street art and explore the history of the only art form deemed to be illegal and one that really helped shape my identity. I've been asked everywhere I go, why Craze and why I still go by that name. I only really have an answer to the first question and sort of to the second. Craze is actually a ripoff of two classic writers that I've been able to look up at the time. And honestly, I still go by Craze because it's who I am. Almost everybody had a tag growing up. And after watching the movie Star Wars in the 7th grade, I wanted to be Dondi or Scene or Zephyr, one of those guys. The best way I can describe it is Craze is my alter ego that wants to do art. This is something, though, that I always thought to ask real writers, and I actually got the chance to catch up with a legendary writer from the BX to talk some BS shit and find out why he does what he does. This is a little interview I did with Bio from Tats crew. Check it out. As a kid, growing up in the Bronx, you were bigger than fucking Batman, Iron Man, anyone like that, because your name was all over the Bronx, and I wanted to be just like you. I always call myself a self-proclaimed toy because I don't think I ever lived up even a 10% of what you guys did and the courage that it took to do what you guys did. But thank you for joining me. We got Bio from Tats crew. Thanks so much, dude, for being here.
Thank you for having me, man, brother. Thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, man. So this is a project really that's about really centers kind of around my life, but it's really about the Bronx. It's the Bronx through my eyes, and I've learned to find a lot of beauty in the Bronx. And the way that I found beauty initially in the Bronx was through art and specifically through graffiti and what I call is like writing on the wall. Right. So for me, I just had a couple questions. For a legend like yourself, like how did you come to graffiti, into the world of graffiti, and was that your entry point to art?
Pretty much. I mean, for me, like I've always enjoyed like drawing and stuff like that. So from like an early age, I remember being in elementary school and the teacher giving us like an assignment to do like your initials as a logo. So I did the assignment before we even went home. This was something that already interested me because I was copying the comics and the letters and stuff like that. And I saw the graffiti on the subway, and at that moment, it just pulled me to that. I was like, I wanted to do that. I didn't know anything about it. I couldn't go home and Google it because there was no internet. So I was like, I just went back, to the neighborhood, started asking anybody that, what do you know about this? They're like, talk to this guy, he writes. I used to, go talk to somebody else. In the beginning, like no established writers are going to really mess with you or talk to you. So it was mostly toys you were getting information from. So little by little, I started learning more and more. So that's how I got into graph, just seeing it and wanting to do that.
Hey, how did you come up with your name?
My name was, it was just simple. I was just trying out different variations. I did VIO, I did DAB, I tried BIC. Then a friend of mine, he used to have like really good hand style, and he took a BIO tag, and I was like, oh, those letters are pretty cool. And he was like, it looks good. So I just kept the name. And we were just hanging out in the staircase in the projects, and he took a tag. I was like, I'm gonna use that, and I stuck with that.
I feel like one of the things that stood out to me that you said that is, I guess, a generational difference between us, in terms of like, because I'll give you an example. I didn't really get to touch graffiti or even know what it was until 1996, right?
Oh, wow.
So I'm 34 years old. I was 10 years old in 1996, and that's when I moved to the Bronx and was scared as shit to be in the Bronx because I had heard of so many bad things moving from Washington Heights about the Bronx. And I just found, I found graffiti, like the writing that was all over the place was like what I found dope and beautiful. And like for me, that was kind of like my entry point, to the art world. And just to hear you talk about how like even you at that time, there was no person to really ask. Like you couldn't go on Google and type in, like how to do a fill-in, what are the best places to get up in New York City? Like now you can do that. We got the benefit that in 1996, it wasn't much internet around, but I had there was already videos out online, stuff, of classic writers, Don D, Scene, yourself, Tats crew.
Yeah.
But just, you guys, I think, are special within the context of the Bronx, because I feel like you just mentioned that was 40 years ago. I feel like you guys are really responsible for shaping kind of like what that style looked like here, especially through your murals and through the work that you guys have done all over the city. So I appreciate you, for picking up that can. What did you pick up first? What was it? Was it markers?
No, it was markers first, and then I started trying it with spray cans, and it was just terrible. My first piece was horrible. I did it in like a back of a schoolyard. I did it like silver and green. It was terrible, but to me, it was like the best thing in the world. I would go and visit my little piece and look at it, and then from there, I was like, now I got to get on and try the subway. So my next step was I need to go hit the subways, and then that became my mission. Trying to find out where the trains were laid up at night, or in when they would get parked over the weekend in the layup. So it was finding out how the whole thing works. It was a mission.
It was really busting missions in the middle of the night, man.
Yeah.
What was that? What's one of your favorite spots?
We used to go a lot to the 6th tunnel, in between Hunts Point and Longwood, or between Longwood and 149th. Or if not, we would go to this yard that they call the Ghost Yard, which was on the other side of if you go by Fordham Road to the end and you cross the bridge over to 207. There's a repair yard there. It's called for us. It's called the Ghost Yard. I don't know why it has that name, but it's really a repair yard where they take.
What nefarious reason they have for giving it that name?
But they take trains from all over the city there to repair. So we would go and catch, the 6 trains there, or we would catch the 5 and 2 lines, which was the lines that we were interested in. So we would go to the Ghost Yard.
And why was it important to get up on the 2 and the 5 line? These are things that I kind of know, but I feel like for for getting up, what is first? Let's start with that definition of getting up, right? Like, what is getting up?
Getting up is getting, fame, getting your name out there on every train, every wall, every possible surface that you can.
Visibility.
Yeah, you spend your whole day from waking to sleeping just tagging on anything you could find. And
That was the social media marketing campaign
basically
of the time.
the day long, all day, every day. I mean, you wake up and you're like, all right, your whole day consisted of, I need to go get paint, I need to go get markers. And on the way there, you tag it. And again, this isn't like nowadays where you can go and buy the spray paint, or you can buy markers and all this. All this stuff was stolen. We would go to like Pearl Paint on Canal Street or different hardware stores and steal whatever. Yeah, we'd go rack 1 or 2 cans in one spot, go to another, spend the whole day going all over the city trying to just gather enough paint to go painting that night.
I want to know what you feel about, like, so everyone knows and gives props to the Bronx for being a place where it's like the birth of hip hop, right? Like one of the places that birth hip hop, and a lot of the focus on that is around the music, right? And so, what do you think about the way that the art, had an influence on it?
I mean, the art has always been there. I mean, what people fail to realize, because they always say, hip hop, graffiti is an element of hip hop, but graffiti was also already existed before they even coined the term hip hop, because you had, guys who were listening to rock and roll music, skateboarding, that knew nothing about hip hop, but were doing graffiti. You know what I'm saying? They were listening to Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Metallica, or some shit, but they were into graffiti. So graffiti kind of was its own entity, and then it kind of got bunched in with, with the music, with the dance and everything, and it became an element of hip hop. But I think the reason it became an element was a lot of the writers from back then. The writers used to do the flyers for the parties, or they used to do the jackets for the MCs, or stuff like that, the pants. So it became like you lived in the same neighborhood, so you knew somebody who either was an MC, a b-boy, a DJ, or a graffiti writer. That's just what it was. It was everybody lived in the same neighborhood.
It just kind of like all melded together,
it became a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle thing for sure. Now, talk to me about the Bronx. You grew up in the Bronx, didn't you?
Yes.
What section of the Bronx?
I grew up in Bronx River Projects on 174th Street. And it's pretty much, back then, early, you had the gangs before it became like, it went from like gangs, like real street gangs, like the Black Spades, the Savage Nomads, Savage Skulls, all those street gangs back then. That's when I was like young kid. And it became like, that's the Zulu Nation started up, because where I grew up was in the projects in Bronx River. So it was Zulu Nation. And then you had guys like Africa Bambaataa who were throwing parties in the community center in the back and the outside. So then you would have like different MCs come into Bronx River and performing, on the little stage, or whatever. And you would see like Cold Crush. This is all before, I'm talking before any actual hip hop albums came out. This is like the early days of hip hop.
These were the parties, the parties.
It was just a park, a party might be like 50 cents. I think $1 was too much, or $2 was like, whoa, this is like a crazy party. $2, you know what I mean? And for sure, it was not. Nobody ever thought we'd be doing this for a living or making money off of it. This was really just about getting up, standing out amongst your peers, the other graffiti artists. Like, you wanted to be the most known. You wanted to be have the most pieces, the most tags. So it was strictly just about that. And then, obviously some of the older guys who had been doing it before us that had stopped painting subways started doing, stuff in galleries and stuff like that. But for us, we was like, fuck the galleries, fuck that shit. We want trains. We wanted our mentality like that. Fuck that.
That's what a lot of people don't get, that there's a separate culture that exists, and I was lucky enough to get like a peek into it. But that it kind of exists here. I feel like it exists in some places like here, Philly, places that had that kind of built into the culture of just getting up and like just being all city.
It still exists worldwide. Like if you go to Europe and overseas in different countries, they're fucking like, when I was in Greece, the trains were bomb. I'm watching like top to bottoms, and I'm looking at this shit. I'm like, what is this, like 1980 and shit? This shit is crazy. And this shit
That's
was,
the thing. I feel like here it's kind of been pushed toward the gallery more than I feel like the.
I mean, people still do trains here. The problem with here is that they've gotten it so much under control that when people do paint trains, they just pull it out of service. You know, back then it was every single train, so you couldn't pull
Pull them out of
every
service.
single train out of service. Nowadays, if you do 10 cars, you do 220, like 210 car, they'll pull those 2 trains out of service, and they got enough trains to put in service, so nobody ever really gets to see it. But there is a whole culture that still exists today. Like if you look and Google like clean trains New York, you'll find a bunch of stuff.
I mean, for me, I feel like that those Giuliani years, right, had an impact on the way that people see that here, like in the city, the idea of seeing 2 or 3 trains tagged up. I don't know, maybe like the downtown folks don't. Maybe now they'll like it, but I feel like for a long time it was kind of like a stigma around like tagged up trains.
I mean, New York City made a commitment, like they didn't want to be seen like that anymore, because it kind of showed like that the city had no control. They were broke. They were that the city's out of control. For them, it represented like, yo, we can't control the people here. We don't have the money to keep it clean. So once they got it in check, so to speak, they're like, we're not letting
Never going back.
We lived that already. We already know how that should go down.
And so you grew up in an era where like being from the Bronx and representing the Bronx, not everybody would stand up, and say, yeah, I'm from the Bronx and I'm proud to be that necessarily. And now I feel like there's a lot of love for the Bronx. And how does it feel to see all this love and like this, the way that it's being represented now?
I mean, what you got to remember is what was going on back then. Like the Bronx was destroyed. Like you had a lot of abandoned buildings. You had the landlords were setting buildings on fire to collect insurance. It was wild. And for the people who grew up during that time, it's crazy because you didn't see it as something unusual. It was just that was your neighborhood. That's what
Your reality.
It is until you start going outside your neighborhood and traveling that you look back and say, what the fuck? Our shit was crazy. Like we was living like fucking the war zones. And I think that's why the people who have been here so long have that love for the Bronx, because they've been from the bottom of it to now where it's clean and whatever and respectable, and they just got that love and association with the Bronx. That pride, that Bronx pride.
For sure,
we made it through fucking the toughest of times. Not a lot of people can say that. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of countries that can say that, but for being in the United States and in the conditions the Bronx was in, and still being here, it was a proud thing.
It's a big thing, man.
A lot of people went to jail. A lot of people got killed. So to make it to a certain point here in the Bronx, you got to be like, I'm from the Bronx. A lot of that perception of the Bronx came from the news or people in movies. When they're making all these crazy ass movies like this is supposed to be the Bronx. It's not really the Bronx and shit. The Bronx. So everybody has this like, oh shit, the Bronx is scary. The Bronx is this, that. Until you actually hear and you be like, that shit is all. I mean, yeah, obviously there's certain sections like that, where stuff can happen.
Like everywhere.
That's like anywhere in the world. That's not unique to the Bronx. So,
absolutely.
It was all how it was being also portrayed in the media. But don't get it twisted. It was a little wild, but if you were from here, you knew how to maneuver and stay clear of all that nonsense.
What was the most meaningful piece of art that you've made that I think that has to do with with the subject that I'm saying, like in the Bronx, about the Bronx, that has to do with that?
I mean, like I said, we travel worldwide. So for us, it is important that we represent the Bronx. So what we realized at one point, like we travel all over the world, we paint other neighborhoods, other cities, and other countries. We need to come home and rock some stuff in our neighborhood. So we started, like, there was one mural we did on Simpson Street in Westchester. We probably did it in 2011 originally. And it was just, I love the Bronx. And it was these huge block letters, maybe about 8-9 feet
tall. The heart.
And then inside of each letter, you had stuff relating to the, like the botanical gardens, the Bronx Zoo. There's a photo of the Jonas Bronx, who the Bronx is named after, and he's signing a treaty with the original indigenous people who were from the Bronx that he got, I guess, robbed them for the land. You gave them whatever, and but we got an image of that. We got burnt down buildings to show that era. We got Yankee Stadium. Everything that's kind of iconic, and that when you think of the Bronx, we try to include into that mural. So that's one of those murals that we're really proud of.
Yo, that's a dope mural. I used to live right down the block from there. Actually, I used to live in the building that is that the Big Pun mural, which I think you guys also
which one? The one further up by
the one on Westchester and like right off Intervale.
Oh, okay, on Rogers Place over there.
Rogers.
By the White Castle.
Exactly. I used to live in that building across from the White Castle. So
really?
I know that neighborhood really well, and I think it's so dope. That if you walk through that neighborhood, there are you could do like a walking tour of a few Tats crew murals and just like iconic shit that will give you an idea of what the Bronx is really about. Like that holds some culture in it.
We had a lot more. A lot of them have come down. Like we really had like a lot back then. I mean, throughout the years, we've lost a lot of murals just because development, buildings getting knocked over or stores being built. But we had a lot, throughout the years. I mean, we've done hundreds and hundreds of murals.
Yeah, man. And my last question, this thing is called Bury Me in the Bronx. And the reason it's called that is because, when I was living in LA, I saw a lot of parallels between like South Central and the Bronx and kind of like how some stuff developed around there. And it just, it felt like the West Coast version of home. Right. But I was living out there, and I had a conversation, and the concept for this came out of my love for the Bronx and me missing being here and the food and the people and the culture and the art and you guys seeing your murals every day. And so my question, the statement came out that no matter where my life takes me, bury me in the Bronx. And so I wanted to ask you, where would you want to be buried?
I mean, I guess it would have to be the Bronx at this point. At this point in my life, this is what I know. This is where I'm from. I don't care where I may be living or at the point or wherever, but definitely, or at least part of me, leave part of me here.
Part of you got to be buried here somewhere. Yeah. Not to be morbid, but I could picture a whole Tats crew mausoleum in Woodlawn, just with the fucking tags made out of fucking marble. But yo, Bayo, thank you so much.
Hey, brother, thank you, man. I wish you success with what you're doing, and keep doing your thing, man. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you, man.
It was good talking with you.
Yo, thank you to Bayo again for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it, bro. Let's talk origin stories of graffiti, though. Humans have been writing on walls since we were in caves. I won't go back that far, but based on what I found, and feel free to correct me if you have more information, modern graffiti and street art have origins not in the Bronx, but in Philadelphia in the 1960s, and many credit Daryl Cornbread McCrae as one of the first graffiti artists, if not the first. While in YDC, a juvenile detention facility, a cook gave him the nickname. In YDC, gang members would write their names and affiliations on the walls, and while McCrae claims he was never in a gang, he began writing his new nickname alongside theirs. When McCrae was released, he and his friends began writing their name and spray paint in their neighborhood. And while in high school, Cornbread infamously tagged Cornbread Loves Cynthia all across North Philly to impress his crush. Talk about game, because he eventually bagged her. Cornbread doesn't tag anymore, but is a youth advocate and public speaker and is involved in several arts programs in Philadelphia, so shout out to him. This new art form, graffiti, then made its way from Philly to the streets of New York in the late 60s, and in my opinion, really goes hand in hand with the rise of community mural projects. According to a few articles I found online, this could be traced to the Chicano movement in the mid-60s and usually involved a political message. This is about the Bronx, so I won't go too far into that, but I think it's worth mentioning because it was used to tell stories of what was happening in those communities. And I can't help but wonder whether there was some influence on graffiti in the Bronx during the 70s and New York City as a whole, and how it relates to the use of street art to spread a message. Something that lives on today. If you're interested in learning more about it, look up Los Tres Grandes and Chicano Park in San Diego. I was also lucky enough to have the amazing artist, educator, and my friend Feegs, who conducts ethnographic walks in many uptown neighborhoods to talk about community murals and his experience with being a graph writer. Check this out. That's right. Carlos Jesus Martinez Dominguez, aka Figs, Figaro, and Firo 173. Thank you for joining me, bro. I appreciate you. I think there's a few questions that I got for you, but just I want you to introduce yourself a little bit and tell folks how dope you actually are. I know you love to talk a little bit about yourself.
I don't know how dope I am, bro, but yeah, man, you gave the name, like we were talking about before, I'm a Washington Heights dude. Like a lot of Washington Heights, I went to school downtown. I went to LaGuardia Music and Art, and it wasn't only there, but especially there, they'd ask you where you live, and I'd be like, yo, 173rd, and they'd be like, oh, the Bronx. And like dudes from uptown this high up, we'd be like, because unless you say Harlem, you from the Bronx. You know what I mean? This was circa 1991, just to age you a little bit. So nah, B. I won't front like I'm from the Bronx, but yeah, I know a lot about the Bronx.
You mentioned that you spend a lot of time up there too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it. It's right across High Bridge right there, the Cross Bronx. Most of my friends growing up, family members, of course, just lots of things. I mean, in a way, you could separate it if you want by talking about the neighborhood of the borough, but it's a geographic patch that's connected. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man.
So yeah, like most people I know from the Bronx, especially the immediate area, especially if you're Dominican, you're gonna be in the Heights. You know what I mean? So vice versa. But no, I'm an artist and an educator, like you said. I work for a couple of museums. I make prints, and I like to say that I come from a culture of graffiti. Overall, a hip hop culture, which it doesn't necessarily need to belong to, but it has very, very, and arguably maybe does belong to, but it has very, very strong roots in hip hop. Let's say the subject matter we're going to be talking about today. I used to write, if I could, age myself again, pretty much those years from about 1986 to about the late 90s. I was a writer, you know what I mean? And I was kind of a toy, meaning, I wasn't all city or anything like that, but you would know who I am in my neighborhood, maybe around my high school. I remember we used to like writing in the 30s or so, like, around Macy's and shit.
Visibility.
Yeah, but yeah. That's how I grew up. I grew up in the thick of the graffiti movement in New York. So
you mentioned something that stood out to me, and I'm gonna ask you about it. It's kind of like I had it as two questions, but I think you kind of made me think about it a different way. But I guess you mentioned that you were a writer, and one of the main reasons I want to talk to you about this topic, not just because you were a writer, but also because of your work in the community and what your wealth of knowledge about murals. Like this dude knows about murals, especially in New York City and uptown communities. And so I guess the context of the question is, what's the difference between a writer and someone who does murals and a muralist? And I mean, I guess wrapped up in that question, there's like the legality question, right? Which is like, why is graffiti the only art form that was deemed illegal?
Yeah. And there's a lot there. I mean, let me start off with like, a writer is normally a muralist. And when you say muralist, right, we're talking about, historically a spray can using, right, muralist, right? Somebody that's using mostly typography, some kind of stylized typography, along with, character making, right? Especially in the early days, Saturday cartoons and stuff like that. So it started to get more, unique and individualized. But a writer is simply somebody that would write their name. You know what I mean? If we could talk about a lot of the old school writers, a lot of them hated being called graffiti artists. They would insist on being called writers. You know what I'm saying? For instance, Phase 2, may he rest in peace. Like he used to say it all the time. He hated the term graffiti. You know what I mean? Like my boy Coco 144, he doesn't really appreciate it. He's kind of like accepted it because it's just part of the norm. Like me and a word like Latino, like, okay, I understand what you mean, but I reject the term. They coined themselves writers, from what I understand, and then graffiti was applied because graffiti means to put writing on walls in Latin, right? And there's no connotation towards legality or illegality, but when writing jumps on the scene, graffiti art, right? That you had mentioned something before that I don't want to get too deep into, but it could be argued. This mural movement, the Chicano mural movement, and from what I understand, the Chicano graffiti movement, if we want to call it a graffiti movement, kind of were two different things that maybe went side by side, just like street art and graffiti do. But from what I understand, you see, gang, like gang tagging, old English letters for the most part, which was distinguishedly different from the East Coast, where we started stylizing our letters individually. You know what I mean? Like, or by borough or locale, right? There's like New York styles, there's East Coast styles that started to grow, right? But at first, East Coast, especially in New York City and maybe Philadelphia, even though they started it, we started like applying more style to our writing, adding this unique typography. And from what I understand, on the West Coast, they were doing graffiti, meaning illegally writing on private and public property, right? But they were doing it for gang purposes, and they weren't abstracting letters, building them up, making it big to where we get to the muralist part that I believe you're talking about, right? But for somebody like me, they're kind of like different. And to get back to what we're talking about, it's like a writer is somebody that or a bomber, right? Like there's lots of different words we can use. Is somebody that and I'm borrowing from lots of legends, you know what I mean? Like and sorry if I don't like give direct references, but sometimes I forget. But like for some writers, it was putting that tag up, sometimes small, sometimes big, sometimes humongous, but writing it in the same style over and over and over and over and over again until you can become known as something like All City, right? And when you're illegally doing so, the quicker, the better, right? Like that's why so writing is logical to the illegal aspect of the culture we're talking about right now. Then when we get to muralism, right, it's even more amazing because these early muralists were also doing illegal murals. And a lot of the times they were doing it in the dark, in train yards, you know what I mean? Bio, a legend, do them illegally, right? No lights, cops after you, dogs, you know what I'm saying? All kinds of dangers,
But community murals, I think, came about around the same time, right? And I kind of, in my research, traced it back to the Chicano movement. There were murals, obviously, before this, but like community where the point of it was to make the whole community be able to see it and feel represented in this type of art. That came about in the 60s, in the mid 60s too. And my understanding is that it came about from like Chicago and the Chicano culture, the Chicano movement around there. So like, just as someone that you put me up on game with some murals around the city and community murals specifically. So I feel like, I guess I don't have an answer about this and I don't know the actual truth, but it's like one of these things that feels like it could be true to me. And I'm like, I want to ask this question to somebody who may know some of this information. So I think there is some sort of like correlation between those things happening around the same time, right? Like community murals came about, the Chicano movement's happening, graffiti's happening, a few years later in the Bronx. But here in the Bronx and in New York City as a whole, like there were people who were doing it, who were using it to write messages, community messages. There were protests, writers too. So I feel like I just have a question, I guess, about is there some sort of correlation between that, or is that just a random thing, that just wound up happening at that time?
Nah, I'm sure they fed off of each other. You know, no, yeah, I'm sure they fed off of each other in many ways, and my mind goes in so many directions thinking about that question. I also don't want to just like pass over what inspired, you know, those mural movements in the United States. It was, you know, not Chicanos, it was Mexicans. You know what I'm saying? Like the muralist movement in Mexico that became a kind, you know, started inspiring other countries to like do mural projects and shit. Especially when it comes to trying to reconnect with their indigenous roots, right? And that was like social justice in itself, you know, for the time and still today. The you know, but we're talking about the muralists, you know, like the mural movements here. I think there was also always a rivalry. You know what I mean? Rivalry in a way, because you know, when I do those walks about the murals, like we can talk about the beautiful murals, we can also talk about, you know, points that sometimes we never really think about. Who okayed that mural? Who said yes to that mural? Who paid for that mural? Did the artist get paid for that mural? Is the artist a local artist? Is the artist from away? Is the artist representing the culture in the neighborhood, or is it a generic wide message? You know, if it's on a school, did they participate with the school? Did they ask the school? Because so these are the things that I like to think about, and I think about murals as a you know, like it's a political issue almost. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I don't know if I'm answering the question whatsoever, but you know, I know right now there's a push, a give and take, right? So for instance, right by me, there's the tunnels on the 1 train, right, that link St. Nicholas to Broadway. And you know, a couple of years ago, there was 4 artists that were awarded, I think it was $20,000, right? Each to do a mural each. And one of the artists was a Bronx muralist, Cope 2, that, you know, I've met him a couple of times. I don't know him personally. From my understanding, he does legal and illegal joints. You know what I mean? Because he's a world famous artist in terms of going to Europe.
I still see box trucks
exactly
come up with.
And most of those box trucks be parked where and come from where? The Bronx, right? So we're gonna get back to something that we were talking about before. But let me get back to what I was saying. Writers in the neighborhood, soon after those murals were done, started bombing those murals. You know what I mean? Like, and I remember some of the people asking or saying, making comments like, oh, look, it's so disrespectful. Look, we can't have nice things because look what they do. And, you know, like sometimes those sentiments are true. I mean, you're dealing with like, you know, you're dealing with a culture that to a certain degree is about appropriating public space. You know what I mean? Not to get too deep into that, but that and maybe we will. But I think you're also undermining or demeaning the intellect of some of these writers. You understand what I mean? Meaning that as soon as those selections were made, I asked myself the question, why weren't any of these artists local artists? Why is $20,000 that can help somebody with their rent for mad long? You know what I mean? Like, can
that's
pay
2 years of rent for some people.
For some people in the neighborhood, right? Well, not in this neighborhood anymore, but you know, it'll get you by for a while. And
you know, I met you through another project that we work on, and you know, within that project, the Sneaker Talk Club, you also took us on this ethnographic walk through a neighborhood in El Barrio, and it really opened my eyes to kind of the history of some of the murals down there, and that's why I asked you to come and help me. Also, because you are someone who lived that graffiti life in a much more real way than I did. You know, I feel like my career in it was really short. And was graffiti your first entry point to art?
No, I wouldn't say it was. I mean, you know, I mean, it's debatable. I don't know. It's like almost like they happened at the same time. But I think about the subliminal. I think about like cartoons. I think were the first. You know what I'm saying? Like cartoons, and then very quickly it became almost at the same time graffiti and comic books. Which it's funny because they always kind of, graffiti always fed off of comic books,
For sure. Even a lot of the text that was used, I think in the 80s, like a lot of the lettering was it was almost out of comic books. I think about an artist like Scene, right? Who like the Mad TV logo and that lettering, that's one of the things that stood out the most to me growing up. So I definitely am on the same page with you about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was kind of that was when you got, and what age was that about?
Oh, I mean, early, I want to say 11, 12, probably even before that. But in terms of actually starting to draw and stuff, yeah, about 11.
About the same. I got similar answers. Most people, I think that's like the time, where you're just kind of like, yo, I need to put my name up here somewhere. All right, so my question then is, why did you begin? I know the age now, but why'd you begin tagging? Like, what was the hook?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, to be honest with you, during the period I grew up, even if you didn't tag, you had a tag. Like, it just depended on how active you were. I mean, I don't want to say 100% of people had a tag, but mostly everybody had a tag. And even if you just wrote it in your own building, you would write it.
Yeah.
For me and my boys, we were active. We were more active, like I said, we never really went all crazy and devoted our life, because there's a lot of writers that really did devote their life, lost their lives,
Yeah, man.
Smith and Sane were from around my way, and Sane fell off the Brooklyn Bridge, writing his name on the bottom of it. So like, don't even want to compare to people that did it like that. But, me and my boys, pretty much every one of them, we would start at about, 15 years old, maybe even 14, to like, get spray cans, steal spray cans, and go out at night. You know what I mean? Like, not too late, but we try to go out at about 11 o'clock. You know what I mean? And we just go riding. We started off easy, like we lived by Riverside. You know what I mean? And we'd go down to Riverside, which is really kind of safe. I mean, we could get bagged.
Yeah, I mean, it's like out of the way a little bit.
To like writing on Broadway and stuff like that, Damn, B, what was the question to begin with?
No, yeah, you answered the question. Why'd you begin tagging? You mentioned that everyone had a tagging.
Everybody did, and it was just, I don't know. It was once you start doing it, I think it's two things: the rush that you get from doing it, right? Like you are doing something illegal. You know what I'm saying? And then it's also, and it's a rush when you get away with something you're not supposed to be doing. So I think for a little kid, it was like, it excited me that I got away with that and didn't get caught. And then there was the other element that you start becoming known. You know what I mean? Like people start knowing you or asking, yo, who's that person? Or if you're in, like circles or whatever, yo, what you write? I write viral, Oh, I saw you up on the RNS Strauss. You remember that? That was my most famous tag, by the way.
Hey.
RNS Strauss, right on 175th, where the United Palace is.
I know exactly where that is. I grew up on 173rd in Wadsworth, right around the corner first. Thank you, Fees, for gracing me with your presence. I want people to know that you're an amazing artist, and also, you lead these tours. You're at the Museo del Barrio right now, right? And you work with a ton of other museums, but I think that what you're doing in Uptown and East Harlem is amazing. So thank you for coming on my first inaugural episode of this and giving me some game on this graffiti culture. I hope you'll be back on at some point. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Fees. Now, obviously, a lot of what happened in the culture predates me. I fell in love with graffiti and the Bronx and the time when the city had already decided that graffiti was art. As a kid from DR who came here age 4 and didn't really discover hip hop or graffiti until by age 9, I'm grateful for those who came before me and documented what was going on. Thank you, Feegs and Bio, for sitting down with me. Bio, thank you for holding it down for over 40 years in the BX. I want to thank also Henry Chalfant. That movie that I mentioned, that documentary Star Wars, a lot of the video used in that was shot, and photos used in that were shot by Henry Chalfant. And so thank you for having the foresight to capture that stuff. And thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone that's keeping Graph alive. I'll be honest, this episode did feel a little incomplete. I started doing research about the history of the art of the Bronx and went down a graffiti rabbit hole. I was a little disappointed I didn't get answers to a few questions, and I had a couple gaps in my research between 1940s and 1950s. Historically, that was a time when the BX was seeing a lot of growth, and it seems odd that I couldn't find information about art during that time. I did find a couple things, but I welcome anything that can put me on to some more game. 2 moments in Bronx history that I think are worth mentioning because they're dope as fuck is first, the Lincoln Memorial, yes, the one in DC, was sculpted right here in the BX in 1918 by the Piccarelli brothers, 6 Italian brothers from the South Bronx. Look it up. I hope I pronounced their name right. They are responsible for many, many other iconic sculptures, but that's my favorite one. And second, that Batman, yes, the real Bruce Wayne, was also created right here in the BX by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. In fact, in 2017, the corner at 194th Street in Grand Concourse was renamed Bill Finger Way in honor of the fact that Bob and Bill used to meet there at Pope Park to discuss the character. With this, I also wanted to highlight folks that are making art now in the Bronx, stuff that transcends street art. Like I mentioned before, the Bronx is not a monolith. It would have been a 3-hour episode if I tried to fit everything in, but especially with my interviews. But I want to revisit this art subject. That's what's dope about the BX. Always has more to offer, so watch out for episode 2. And remember, no matter where my life takes me, bury me in the Bronx.